there, and welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I am your host, Gabrielle Nicolay. I am the toddler whisperer at Speech Kids and parent coach at Raising Orchid Kids. And today I'm joined by Scot Marken of Ed Redefined, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. So Scott, welcome.
Thank you. So it's fun. I'm excited to be here. I have to say, so I don't have a title that's as good as head toddler whisperer. Okay, but I love that. I love that. The first time I heard that about you. So I am a very specialized educational consultant that exclusively supports students who are neurodiverse, students who have mental health issues, as well as students who have learning disabilities with their post-high school plans and experience, typically college, but that's part of the work that I actually do is to see is somebody on a college path, and if not, what is the path that they're interested in, what's their best path.
And I love this conversation. Most of the people listening will not, they might have a college-bound senior, but most of them are a college-bound student. Some of them will have younger kids, but I love having these conversations because they provide that light of like, there's a beacon there. There are programs being created as we speak for these complicated kids, for neurodivergent kids, neurodivergent kids. I always get it wrong. In any case, quirky, and more are being created. So we know that there aren't enough, but you're in a position to speak to this better than I about sort of what's out there when kids graduate from high school, where they have a lot of support.
So there's a lot that is happening, and I think that it's sort of a natural evolution of there's more individuals who want to go to college than did before. As an example, 50,000 high school graduates each year are autistic, and my understanding is about 40% of them have the intellectual ability to go to college. Now, figuring out whether college is a good idea for them in terms of what some of their interests are, what some of their needs are, that's a very important step. But I think that people should, believe that there's opportunities, that exist. There's more than 4,000 colleges that exist in the US. And so, you've probably heard of like 100, or really, but there's a just tremendous amount of variety. And yes, when you talked about support, so there's increasing supports that are available, but they're different than in high school. And that's because the law actually changes that governs it. And so, it's not the IDEA. Once you graduate, basically what happens is that you then look for supports based on the American with Disabilities Act. So there are some types of support that, are available in high school and are available in college. And then there's some types of supports that are not. And then there's some supports you can get in college that you couldn't get. So there's a lot that's there. In addition, I am seeing that every year there's a couple of more new programs at colleges focused on supporting individuals who are neurodiverse, and typically these programs are for individuals who are degree seeking students, and there's about anywhere between 2 to 5 hours a week of additional supports that are available. And there's some growing support that exists really mostly around academics, not enough from what I've seen related to the non-academics, life skills, residential, social. But I think that, we're seeing more and more develop, and also private support that is kind of filling in for where there are needs.
So I want to talk about this because because it's a recurring theme, particularly in autism, particularly, but also in lots of different kinds of neurodiversity. So in ADHD, this happens. In other learning disabilities, in dyslexia, there is a mental health component that sometimes, often, always travels with these areas of difficulty. And it has an impact, and it comes along for the ride, whether or not we want it to. And in my experience and the way I think about it, what starts as a latent, and I'm going to choose bad words, but what starts as a latent weakness at age 3, and if that doesn't get addressed, now we're masking, we're compensating, we're in situations, and by we I mean the child, we're putting the situation where the child is in situations that are difficult, where they're having an increased stress response that's maybe too much for them, and now we've got layers upon layers of things. And so when we get to age 18, now we've got history here, and we've got to start, we don't have to, but we have the opportunity to start unwinding some things or acknowledging, help me out here. tell me how you think of this mental health component as regards what else we're talking about
Sure.
here.
So I'm just going to give a little bit of context. So, in addition to specializing in supporting students who are neurodiverse, and I like to say actually I support, not that I work with,
Mm,
um, in addition to supporting students who are neurodiverse, I support students who have significant mental health issues
mhm,
that they may not be neurodiverse or they may not have any learning disabilities.
mhm,
But you are correct that, for individuals who are neurodiverse, there definitely is a lot of co-occurring mental health issues, and it can be really complicated in figuring out, where are the challenges sometimes coming from. And so I think one of the first things is that it's important as a child grows to have the child learn about who they are, have the child learn about, if they're taking medication, why are they taking medication? I've had some students where I've asked, "Do you take medication?" And the response was, "My mom sticks a blue pill next to my cereal, and I just take that each day." And so there's a big change. I mean, you said 18, right? And also, if you're going to a residential college, of the student is now responsible for their medication, and there are workarounds and backups that you can use. But the more that somebody knows about themselves, and the more that it's presented as this is not there's no stigma here. Like, I'm someone who has anxiety. Okay. I used to not say that, but now I think it's important because the more you just talk about it, the less stigma there is.
it's so
Um,
interesting. And we have this conversation all the time over on the Raising Orchid Kids side of like, when should I tell my child that they're autistic? And maybe you're not going to tell them they're autistic. You're going to have a conversation about it. But it's a little bit, I think, like the sex talk, which isn't actually the sex talk. It should be many, many little drips and drabs over time of conversations about how things work. And in this case, we're going to be talking about how brains work. How does your brain work? When you get into this situation, how do you respond? And how is that the same or different from how other people respond? Why do you take this blue pill? How do you feel before you take it? And how do you feel after you take it? And do you think it's a good idea? And like, right? And if that child is very young, and I think we should be having these conversations depending on the developmental level of the child, you can certainly start having very short, frequent conversations with 7, 8-year-olds, some of them, and some of them you're going to wait a little bit longer. But like, yeah, being able to advocate for yourself means being able to understand yourself first. And how are you going to do that? um right.
So I definitely, think that you just said a lot that is really important information for people to think about. I think one of the challenges with parents, and I'm a parent, by the way, one of the challenges with parents is that, on one hand, I see and I have experienced that you want your child not to be limited by having some, you know, name, diagnosis, the way that we currently think of autism, right? But at the same time, it's also important to say that you know, it's not necessarily what somebody's thinking, and there's a lot of misperceptions, and many people don't think about that. Some people believe that autism is an evolutionary advancement, and you think of like Silicon Valley. I've heard, I don't know if this is actually true, right? But I think it's sounds, quite reasonable that Silicon Valley was created by people who are neurodiverse, right? And so we're sort of in this I don't know, this transition period, right? Where like it does make a lot of sense. And I really liked what you said. I'm not a mental health therapist, but I liked what you said in terms of talking about first, not just a label, but somebody's brain and how they think and how they learn best. Um, but I think that it's, important to share and talk about. Now, the work that I do, when people come to me, because I specifically market myself that that's my specialty, right? So I'm aware. There are sometimes where you hear a parent say, "Don't tell my child that, you know, they're autistic."
Mm.
So, that's very, interesting and hard, I think, but that doesn't really affect the work that I do because you look at all my materials and it says, diversity, autism, mental health. But I hear that from colleagues of, it's very challenging because you know that the child needs to learn more about themselves in order to be as independently as live independently as possible.
You started to say something really interesting before we hit record, and I'll let you decide in what level of detail you want to go into. But um, there, I just found this is a very striking quote from you. There's a point at which it's no longer your story to tell. And college is certainly, late teenager, dumb, late adolescence into this early 20s, like even 30s, is this period where our children's stories are becoming their own and no longer ours. Do you want to speak to that transition a little bit?
You know, I appreciate you bringing that up. It's something that I think about a lot, and I think about, advice I may give someone, as well as, how I've done as a parent. What was positive, res- positive way to respond to that, and things I could have and still can do better.
Mm.
I would actually say it's earlier than what you said in terms of high school. I mean,
Okay.
I would think it's probably like, tweens, where, there's a lot of concern about, socially what people are thinking about and where they are in terms of their social development, whether you're someone who is neurodiverse or not. And
Mm.
so, sort of at that point, um, I think you need to question, does your child want you sharing this information? And did you ask them? Right? I think that at a certain point, it is their story to tell. But then I also think that you have your own story to tell as a parent, right? Because you've lived through this, you do live through this, you have success to share with other people, you have challenges that you may want to share with other people. Um, and so I think when someone starts to become a young adult, it's important for them, you to understand what their thinking is, and then, your own story.
It's so, it is, I am the parent of a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old, and um, it is the hardest for me. It is the hardest part of parenting is separating out what I think about what they're doing and what they're doing, which is their business. Right? I mean, if I'm doing my job well, and I, if I'm thinking about it holistically, right? I want to raise an adult who can go out and live their own life and a life that they choose, not that I have chosen for them. But that's painful at some point for me because I am having to give up, first of all, any illusion of control that I thought I had, but also a fair amount of influence. And I think particularly when we have complicated kids, orchid kids, quirky kids, whatever you want to call them, right? Kids who need a little bit of extra. Um, that our role as parent becomes so much more enmeshed because we are giving them the blue pill with their cereal every morning, or we do have to pick them up because they're not able to drive. Right. And there are real factors of independence and development at play that don't mirror a typical trajectory. And yet there are still these typical features of the relationship that are at play as well.
I mean, I think another really great, points that you were great points, not another great that grammar wasn't so good, but that you're bringing up. I think that on one hand, that we want people to be or children to be as independent as possible, right?
Mhm.
At the same time, when someone is not able to financially support themselves, totally independently, where does that fit? Right? Because just allowing someone to make all of their own choices, which ideally I think that's what we want, may not fit in, So just as an example, when I do work with or support families, I typically will ask related to college, I'll ask the parents or maybe somebody else who's paying, typically parents, but it doesn't have to be, is do they have some parameters? If the parameters are that like in my case, my son had been interested in a school in Arizona. I live here in Maryland. I work all over the country. My work is actually international. And but basically he went ahead and he was like, I want to go somewhere. And I was like, I don't feel like I could support that because so across the country, it's 3 hours from an airport once you get there. You don't have a support system. And so my parameters, I define them. And then within that, try to say, you make decisions of what's important for you. Okay. Um, and so I think there's a lot. It's almost like when someone's having a wedding, right? It's like it's the bride and grooms or the bride and bride or however you're defining it, right? Who it is that you want to spend your life with, and you know, yet if the parents are paying, it's I want so and so invited, and I think people can relate to that concept
Mhm.
um, because you want to be supportive, but there's this pull and
I love it.
push.
And acknowledging that, right? Like it's like nothing has gone wrong if that's what's happening. That is the dynamic at play. There are two people in this relationship and they're coming from different places. And I think the problem that we have as parents often of any child is that we think we are in control. And that is a mistake. That is a fallacy. And that is a thing that parents who are raising complicated kids learn really early on because their child is melting at Target or their child is refusing to go to school. And they realize very soon that they don't have control over another person's behavior. At the same time, we are in a relationship that is bidirectional. And so, yeah, I so love the analogy of the wedding, because if I'm going to pay the bill, it's still your wedding. So you're going to have input. And we all know crazy wedding stories where like that wasn't allowed. Where the paying party just dictated all the terms and all they had to do was show up. And that's miserable for everyone and doesn't lead to a good outcome. Or the vice versa, where the person paying is super resentful because right the other party is making all the decisions. That's just not a good recipe for a healthy relationship. And so if we want to be modeling and participating in a healthy relationship with our children, our adult children eventually, we gotta judge that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely. And I think a lot of times what you see is when somebody goes to college, to your point, like if the parent is dictating everything, the reality is once the student goes to school, it's the student's choice of whether they're going to actually get up and go to the class. Are they going to actually use the accommodations they were set up? Are they going to go ahead and utilize, mental health support? And that's something that I see a lot where young adults or emerging, adults really struggle with, where it's like, I was told this is what I have to do. And so now I'm totally going to do the opposite, and, I will try to share with them that I believe that it's better to have support set up, and then you could decide whether you want to use it or not,
Mhm.
just in terms of even like the logistics of getting it set up.
Mhm.
If you decide you need the support and then it's not there, then you can quickly dig yourself into a hole. But I do understand where you know they're like, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I've had some students say that whatever my parents tell me, I purposely will do the opposite. Of course, there's some loving relationships, right? And it could just be that day that, the person said it, right? But they have to buy into it.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to figure out how you do that as a parent,
Yeah.
loving away, but there's also ways that you see your child and, I believe know your child that they may not see, others may not see. So
Yeah.
I actually really like, and I do this in my work, is do you know what like a 360 employee review is?
Yeah,
Okay, right.
but
So
go ahead and explain it. Yeah.
okay, so essentially, like rather than just your supervisor is, evaluating you, or let's just say it's your parents who's kind of the supervisor, right? A lot more than a supervisor, but that it's more effective to go get input and feedback from many people who interact with the employee in different areas of their work life. So it could be employees they supervise, it could be a peer in the community. So I've developed, college readiness assessment where I speak to people who know the students in different areas, someone who has seen the student perhaps going ahead and interacting socially when the parent's not around to either sort of try to support that, or um, do you on your podcast, do you talk about snowplow parents? Not
I
helicopter, but
haven't, but
snowplow?
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. So if you think of a snowplow, right, and we'll see if we get snow in DC
Yeah,
this
this winter.
winter. But a snowplow is like pushing the slow out. So in terms of parenting, it's people, and I'm guilty of this. Is you'll go ahead and you're want to make things like easier or equitable. Like you're going to remove all the obstacles before they even occur,
Mhm.
right? And life really doesn't work that way in terms of, someone's independence. So a lot of times people are doing that completely out of love, but long term, it actually ends up creating challenges.
Yep.
So I think, right, it's finding a balance. But that's a big term in my world now,
That's so
snowplow.
interesting. And there's all kinds of, there's like animal analogies and machinery analogies anyway, but yes, the point being, right, never the opportunity to experience a hiccup,
Mm.
and then learn from that, which again is an area of challenge for neurodiverse kids. Like that is, some kids don't learn from their challenges, or they need to learn from 100 challenges, not just one. And so it gets complicated. It is taxing. And I say on this podcast, like parenting is an extreme sport for many parents.
I
Um,
definitely agree. Uh, professionally, personally, but obviously it's also rewarding,
yeah,
and in different ways than you maybe previously thought it would be.
yeah.
So,
Um,
um,
if parents want, so I have one question and then we're going to wrap up.
yeah.
Do you work with parents, students, or both? And how does that work?
So I typically say that the parent is the customer and the student is the client. Okay. However, depending on the situation, I do actually spend a lot of time with parents, um, either to understand some of the parameters, get feedback of what they're seeing. I also go ahead and do some coaching for parents around this process and what makes sense. And, like you thought you were being really helpful by, writing the student's essay because they struggle with writing. Okay. But, that really is not a good idea because, someone who's in admissions can read that it and figure out it was written by a 50-year-old, right? Not the voice of, someone who's 17. So, but I say it in a nice way, right? I think like, where I understand where you're trying to get at. And so I do both. I work with students and I work with parents. And I try to figure out with each family like what the best type of communication is in terms of the level of involvement. And also to try to give the student as much decision making as possible within some parameters so that, they buy into and, feel that, it's their life. So you'll often see me if I'm doing, say, a Zoom session and the family's in the room. I'm typically talking more directly to the student with the parents, in the background.
If people want to find out more about you, what should they do?
A couple things. So number one is my website. I don't know if you put it up or could put it up, but it's ed as an education, but edredefined.com. And this is something that for maybe a smaller group of people who are listening or watching to this. So I co-moderate a national Facebook group called College Success, Physical Disabilities, Chronic Health, and Mental Health. And while it's not specific to neurodiversity, there's many individuals whose it's mostly parents. So many parents whose children are neurodiverse and they can get free resources from there. And people could just also call me. I'm happy to answer some questions. And if I'm not a good person to support you, my goal is to get you somewhere that is a good fit for what you need.
I love it. And we will link to all of that in the notes. And Scott, thank you for being here. This conversation was a real treat.
Oh, I appreciate it. I appreciate you inviting me. And yeah, I hope it's helpful to some people and just, I really very respectful and just really appreciative of what people's roles as parents. So
It's so apparent and it's so obvious. And so I think just even having this conversation, like I feel really relaxed right now, having talked to
most
you.
people don't usually say that when they talk to me, but thank
Yeah,
you. Thanks very much.
for being
Because
here.
yeah, I can be very passionate, and I try on Zoom not to talk with my hands, but I grew up in New York, so I talk like this, and you know, uh, but yeah, I appreciate that. So,
All good. Take care.
all right, bye. Thanks so much.